gonna work. I just want to acknowledge the Mi'kmaq Nation, whose territories we're all on right now. Yeah, and it's nice to be back in Mi'kmaq, I gotta say. And so, Sego, Sewagwego, Yadi Waka Duriarder Date, Sini Waxanoda, Nokohoe Neha, Denogin Yoda, Onondowa'ga Haudenosaunee, Amanda Yinjits. So, I go by Amanda. I don't really know my actual name, thanks to the intergenerational impacts of residential schools. But I belong to the Turtle Clan of the Onondowa'ga Nation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. You might know us as the Seneca Iroquois. We don't use those colonial terms. It means people of the Great Hill building the Longhouse. And so we're all here today. I also want to acknowledge my sister in struggle and good friend, Ogijitakwe, Vanessa. For being brave enough to be honest in a time of lies and a time of deceit. You know, we've talked today about being at Powershift in order to try to stop the tar sands, stop fossil fuels, you know, but the real question is, can we stop colonialism? This is not about, there is no environmental justice. There's no justice of any kind on stolen land. And so today I'm gonna talk about sovereignty, and I'm gonna talk about kind of dissipation and the role that NGOs have in the process of colonization and continued colonization of occupied, stolen Indigenous territories. And so first, you know, people often ask the question of like, what does like an Indigenous and like POC-led movement look like? You know, how can we make that happen? And like to the people who ask those questions, I say that it is already happening, and it's not yours to make, obviously. And there are ways to support it. And so we need to change our framing and understand and acknowledge that there have been warriors protecting our territories and defending Mother Earth since time immemorial, and that for over 522 years, we have been fighting. And so I ask you, what is settler colonialism? I'm sure people know what colonialism is, where an empire, some kind of state, takes over another nation's territories. It's the territorial exploitation and acquisition, theft, land theft, and the taking of resources. And sometimes people are identified as resources outside of within a Eurocentric white supremacist mind frame. People whose bodies are part of the land are also seen as commodities. But the difference between colonialism and settler colonialism is that the colonizers don't leave. They stay here. And, you know, wind turbines on stolen land are still wind turbines on stolen land. And I think that that's a really important question that we need to ask ourselves. And how are we actually supporting anti-colonial grassroots movements for environmental justice? And so, settler colonialism is not only the practice of land theft and the ongoing occupation of Indigenous territories, but institutions are erected. Oh yeah, you're totally going way too fast. Okay. And I don't know, maybe I'll make a little motion. How about that? Anyway, and so there's an institution that's created, and in this case, we're talking about KK Canada, you know, we're talking about the state itself, is an institution that was established by the ancestors of white settlers for settlers to benefit from. And it is an inherently racist state, and it's because it's built, its very foundation is genocide. Its very foundation is apartheid. Its very foundation is slavery. And so I asked Powershift, what are your goals? Are your goals the same as my goals? I don't know. The real movement is an anti-colonial movement of Indigenous sovereignty, of self-determination, that is combating genocide and land occupation. This is not an interest, something cool to do. This is very much And as my sister before me spoke about survival. And so we heard about this idea of natural resources, and I want to explain something to you folks, and I'm sure you've thought about it before, but this whole paradigm, the paradigm of colonial capitalism, wherein we look at something that has been since time immemorial, familial, our family, our mother, Earth, and other her, and other ourselves from the natural world, in order to chop her up for money, for a completely irrelevant value system. There is a cultural disconnection that exists there that facilitates the ability to kill so much. Industrial civilization will fall, and we're here to help with that. And so I ask you, is the goal winning? Because if the goal is winning, then we need to understand not only the strategic value of supporting grassroots Indigenous sovereignty and anti-colonial resistance, but we also need to understand it beyond strategy and about survival. As you can see, here we go. There's some Lakotas right there. They're marching onto white clay, which is basically, it's some messed up stuff. It's really messed up. I guess one of these. This is the Haudenosaunee. So these are just some examples of Indigenous people who are, oh, where's that? Oh. Yeah, yeah. And this one is in Mapuche territory, obviously. And so, there was the Lakota Nation, the Onondowa'ga, the Mi'kmaq, the Mapuche. These are Indigenous people who are really working on the front lines in order to protect their territory, to protect who they are, to protect their ancestors who are not yet born. And so I wonder, this question again of which side are you on? Because it can't be the side of the state. The agenda of the KK Canadian state is one of imperialism and one of colonialism. So there's this thing called public-private partnerships. And they do that. Well, they help to facilitate that, actually. So public-private partnerships is basically a trifecta of evil, where you have a corporation, you have a state, and then you have a non-government organization, an NGO, that will work in order to further the agenda of the corporation and the state, in order to ensure that things are done in a really good way, and that there's a sense of corporate social responsibility. And we're going to do development in the community and make sure that the people who live near the mine, they're doing all right. And that's the purpose of a public-private partnership. And in the case, first, if you look at CETA, that's basically you have organizations like, now I'm totally blanking on the name, but World Vision Canada, who are actually funded by the Canadian government in order to go do, in order to further the assimilationist agenda of imperialism in Indigenous territory on behalf of Barrick Gold. That's the function we see here. So the NGO actually negotiates between the state and the corporation in order to cut out the real resistance, in order to ensure that an anti-colonial struggle is undermined. So we're going to look at a couple of examples of that. It's really weird when you're not have a clicker, just saying. So this is a really great website. And there's one of the editors is in the room right now. Anyway, so this is talking about CETA and the partnership in Peru, and it basically just proof. This is proof that it happened. Anyway, so basically I think Barrick describes the relationship with Canada World Vision as actually doing development in the affected community. And so what we need to understand here is that because of the imposition of colonial borders, people people are being displaced and estranged from their territories and having their nationhood undermined by a process of colonialism. And so states like Peru, like Argentina, like Brazil, they do not represent the indigenous people there. And there are sovereign nations who are fighting against this continued land occupation. The Mapuche are about one, the Onondowa'ga Nation are another, the Awa Nation are another. There are so many red nations fighting for their continuation of life, really. And so what happens is Canadian mining companies go into other Indigenous nations' territories and destroy them. And I think it's really important to note, oh, this is coming up next. Yeah. But I think it's really important to note that the impacts of colonial occupation in Abya Yala and so-called South America, they experienced what we experienced in 300 years, in sometimes 2 generations. So not only is Canada a settler colonial state, but Canada is actively enacting corporate imperialism by virtue of majority Canadian-owned, Canadian-based companies, mining companies, going into other nations' territories in order to destroy the land and to continue the death machine of colonial capitalism. This is an example a little bit closer to home that people might have heard about before. It's the Canadian Boreal Forest Agreement. And these are a bunch of NGOs that signed on to it. And then underneath it, you can see those are forestry companies. This is an agreement that was made. There's a few ones in there, you know. It's important to keep note of this. Some of the terms that were ultimate, and oh, by the way, Greenpeace did sign on to this, but they ended up pulling out later, I believe. But so, again, this is like an opportunity for negotiation to occur between colonial entities that directly cuts out Indigenous governance and Indigenous representation. And I also want to be clear that band councils, I'm a privileged member of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and we still have our traditional governance. We use our traditional governance system. We have a clan system, and there is, and our Grand Council has actually stated to all band councils and tribal councils, because the border occupies our nations, to no longer use certain symbols because they cannot represent themselves as the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Yeah. And I think that's really important. Of course, not every nation is in that position, but ultimately, when the Crown negotiates with Band Council, what they're doing is negotiating with agents of the Indian Act, which means they are negotiating with the government system that they established. So it's actually the Crown negotiating with the Crown. Just want to be clear about that. And what that means, and that's what we call neocolonialism. And so even Indigenous folks who were employed by NGOs at that time, by NGOs who signed on to this agreement, weren't aware that this was happening. It was so closed door. And there was a non-disclosure that was signed on behalf of the NGOs and Tides Foundation in order to maintain the secrecy, so that way they couldn't talk about it until it was publicly released. And the negotiation, they negotiated the entire agreement while actually cutting out Indigenous leadership, who they had made agreements with and followed protocols with in the past. So, for instance, Greenpeace had met with different nations' leadership, like the Nusal and the Hailed Soup, and throughout this process, the NGO completely cut out the Indigenous governance in making this agreement. And part of the problem is that within this agreement, signatories are not publicly allowed to criticize the corporations. So if there's a violation of the agreement, which also is a compromise, because when you're actually trying to protect your territory, your goal isn't 30% less clear cutting. Your goal is no clear cutting at all. So this is a complete compromise that undermines the health of the territories as well as the sovereignty of the nation. You know, I mean, this is really serious. And all the signatories of like these like greenwashing institutions ultimately were forced to not speak publicly and not criticize publicly any of those companies or the agreement itself. And it goes further to actually have to defend the logging companies in public if a third party, so like if say like Rising Tide or another or like a student group or someone else were to come out and say like, we don't think this is a good agreement and there should be no logging whatsoever, then you have basically a gang of ENGOs who have a legal obligation to start to defend those industry, to defend that industry. And ultimately, not only does this cut flat the resistance in terms of, because it also funnels, people think like, people are like join like mailing lists and come out to big demos and like be part of this mass mobilization process, only to have these secret agreements negotiated in order to totally just like snuff out the real resistance. And so people are putting their time and their energy and their networking within this facade, within a distraction, where the real issues aren't being talked about. And the real issues are land theft, ongoing occupation of indigenous territories. Now this is what is real, you know? I mean, it goes beyond that. I mean, these are just some, it's like throwing actual frontline resistance and indigenous sovereignty like completely under the bus, so to speak. And I mean, it goes further than that, because you have like moments like the Yes Men where they come out and have this like, and it's like, yeah, totally mess with Trans-Canada, but don't talk about saving Canada. Canada is a genocidal institution that has removed my language, the reason I'm speaking English to you right now, who is Canada, fuck Canada. Listen, I can't even explain to you my fervor of hate for Canada. I think there might be another slide. Oh yeah, the clear cutting. Oh yeah, urban, okay. We're getting there. We're getting there. Yeah, you know, and it's like, I mean, it's just like when they have their big conferences, like petrocultures, and people who are part of like climate justice organizations go and like entertain the process, the possibility of actually like doing things together. I don't even understand. Those things just need to be disrupted and shut down. You know, like we shouldn't be participating in avenues that cut out the most important stakeholders, and those are the people whose territories you're on. And so, seeing as I'm in the East Coast, and I'm kind of talking about like collusion between state and government and NGOs, and ultimately corporate impunity and ongoing territorial occupation, I gotta give a shout out to this monolith of destruction right here, Irving. And I'm just gonna talk a little bit about Irving, you know. First of all, they tout themselves as Canada's largest refinery. They're proud of that. They're one of the top 10 largest refineries in the world. 75% of Canada's gasoline is exported to the United States that comes out of Irving, so it's like a cross-border, you know, death circle. And it is a private corporation as well, so its stocks aren't publicly traded, so you can't like spy on it on the TSX like you can with like Enbridge, for instance. And not only does Irving have this like huge refinery, which, actually, next slide. Oh, the next one. Sorry, Cam, I feel like I was telling you what to do. This is a shot, but also it was in the film, and it's like, you see the IRVING, it's like we're Irving and we're gonna kill stuff. Anyway, so there's this tar sands refinery that's sitting on the eastern seaboard that is gonna be working with TransCanada in order to build marine terminals for the Energy East, which means basically loading up, docking up on tar sands in the middle of the ocean, because that's a great idea, and a super rocky coast. They have, they own, like, I don't know if anyone's been to St. John, probably local folks to the East Coast have been there, and it's creepy. They own the rail network they own the convenience stores, like everything. It's an Irving town. People are scared to speak out against Irving. They have a media monopoly in print. Woo! Good. Keep it up. They own all of the print papers. Like, basically it's a corporate feudal system, and they're just sneaking under the radar. They're acting like they're this cute, like, New Brunswick local oil company, but they're huge. It's a giant facility. Like, they have, like, even if, first of all, I don't believe in democracy on stolen native land, but if I did, I would be really annoyed that these people own the papers, you know? Like, you can't even have a facade of journalism, you know? So, anyway, basically my point is, if it's not anti-colonial, you're maintaining the status quo, and environmental justice there is no justice on stolen land, so what does environmental justice look like in the context of occupation? And if you live on the East Coast, you should probably fuck with Irving.